Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, the Delta threat. New data from the CDC reveals how infectious and dangerous this COVID variant is. We break down what we now know. Then, leaving Afghanistan, interpreters arrive on our shores, finding safety after risking it all to help the U.S. during the war. Plus, crackdowns. The Chinese government tightens its grip on Hong Kong by closing the border to prevent a mass exodus. And it's Friday. David Brooks and E.J. Dionne consider what looks to be a major deal on infrastructure, the politics in reaction to the new CDC guidelines, and the investigation into the January 6th Capitol riot. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by BNSF Railway, Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson, financial services firm Raymond James,
the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
and with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
This was a day of sobering and surprising news about how COVID-19 is again accelerating in the U.S. and around the world. The World Health Organization said that infections are up 80% globally just in the past month, overwhelming health systems in many countries. On the continent of Africa, deaths are up 80%. Back in the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control made public a pivotal study explaining how fully vaccinated people can spread the Delta variant. The study raises serious questions about how businesses and schools should operate as they reopen. Amna Nawaz has the details.
Judy, the CDC examined a COVID outbreak in Provincetown, Massachusetts around the 4th of July weekend. Within weeks, that outbreak spread to at least 469 people around the state, a state with nearly 70% vaccination rate among adults. 3/4 of those infected had been fully vaccinated. Nearly 80% were symptomatic. So far, there have been no deaths and just 5 people were hospitalized, but 4 of them were fully vaccinated. And Provincetown had low levels of virus transmission when the outbreak began. In fact, an internal CDC document about the Delta variant obtained by the Washington Post said officials must recognize that, quote, the war has changed. We look at key questions coming out of all of this with Dr. Ashish Jha. He's the Dean of Brown University's School of Public Health. Dr. Jha, welcome back to the NewsHour. Always good to have you here. So people will look at this study and they'll say, look, this tells me if I'm vaccinated, I can still get the virus, I can still feel sick, I can still transmit it to other people. Why should I get the vaccine? What do you say to them?
Yeah, so Amna, first of all, thanks for having me back on the NewsHour. What I would say is that actually this study, looking at what happened in Provincetown, is the vaccine's working exactly as we expected. And let me lay out why. What you had was you had an influx of a lot of people coming to Provincetown for July 4th celebrations, a lot of unvaccinated people, Delta virus surging. You did have a good number of breakthrough infections, not surprising when you have a lot of people packed into bars and clubs. But let's see what happened to those people. Almost all of them did extraordinarily well. A small number ended up in the hospital. No one died. And it did not fuel this massive outbreak that has led to more and more cases in exponential growth. In fact, that outbreak has more or less faded away. Case numbers have declined. Infection numbers are down now. No one died from this, thank goodness. This is the vaccine working. So what I would say to people is, vaccines turn what is a potentially deadly disease into a mild one. Your chances of passing it on are much lower.
Dr. Shah, a lot of people will look at these numbers, though, and say the overwhelming majority of people here were fully vaccinated. Doesn't that say to you that this is actually spreading much faster than we previously thought it was?
Yeah, no, I get that, and that makes some sense to me that people would be concerned about that. You have to remember that underlying population was largely vaccinated. Imagine if 99% of people are vaccinated in a community, then any outbreak will largely happen among the vaccinated. So that, to me, is not unto itself any kind of indictment of the vaccines. The key is to ask the question, is the transmission happening as badly among the vaccinated? And most importantly, the question is, are vaccinated people getting sick or not? And we have very clear evidence that vaccinated people, when they have a breakthrough infection, are not getting sick at the same rates.
You mentioned the Delta strain. Of course, we've heard again and again from officials it is much more highly transmissible. What else do we know about it? Because I know people have questions. Is it transmitted in the same way, breathing in aerosol particles? Do we know anything about transmission by surface or touch?
Yeah, it's still the same virus, so the mechanisms are still the same. It's still an airborne disease, passed from people to people through breathing. There may be a little bit of surface stuff, but we think it's pretty tiny, not a major source. The other thing we know that actually the CDC report highlights is it does look like if you get infected with the Delta variant, you're more likely to get sick than from previous variants. So it may be a more severe form of the virus as well. That's not nailed down, but that is of concern, and we've got to really sort that out.
And that is true whether you're vaccinated or not, correct?
Well, certainly among the unvaccinated. We have not seen a lot of vaccinated people get particularly sick from this. There are going to be a small number who might. So I think for the unvaccinated, that is largely true.
So the CDC did issue new masking guidance this week. They're now saying everyone who's fully vaccinated should wear a mask inside public setting where transmission is high. Walmart is now requiring all its workers in high transmission areas to mask. Broadway is now requiring masks and vaccinations for all members of its audience. Should we, generally speaking as Americans, be reevaluating indoor activities right now, more broadly speaking?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've had to do throughout the whole pandemic is make adjustments as the virus has changed. I mean, this is an evolving virus, and as the virus evolves, we've got to evolve. Right now, we have a very dangerous, very transmissible variant circulating largely among the unvaccinated Americans. I think if you're in a hot zone with a lot of infections, it makes sense to potentially wear a mask indoors. I think it makes sense to avoid large, crowded indoor gatherings like nightclubs and super packed restaurants. That isn't necessarily the policy I'd have for every part of the country, but for those hot zones, I think that's pretty reasonable.
So you mentioned this new strain of the Delta variant we are talking about. There was a World Health Organization official, Maria Van Kerkhove, who was asked about potential new variants of the virus ahead. Take a listen to what she had to say.
There will be more. And it's in the virus's interest. Viruses are not alive, so they don't have a brain to think through this, but they become more fit the more that they circulate. And so the virus will likely become more transmissible because this is what viruses do. They evolve, they change over time.
Dr. Shah, what are the chances we're dealing with another variant sometime later this year?
We might. I mean, look, all of the variants we've seen so far have come out of countries where there were large outbreaks. There are large outbreaks still happening around the world because we haven't gotten vaccines out to the world. So as long as that happens, I think we should be ready for more variants. Whether they'll necessarily be much more contagious or maybe whether they'll evolve our immune systems and our vaccines, I don't know. But I'm pretty hopeful that if we can keep plugging away on vaccinations, we can put this to an end, but we definitely have to pay close attention to that possibility.
Now, I have to ask you, a lot of people we talk to say that they're confused and frustrated, quite frankly, by the way the CDC has been messaging some of the guidance over the last year and a half. They feel like it's shifted and changed. You and I have talked about it before. We've said as the science evolves, as you know more, that guidance does change. But what do you think the CDC needs to do now to make sure this guidance sticks at this latest turn in the pandemic?
Yeah, so what I think the CDC needs to do is explain, first of all, how it makes its decisions, and the fact that when new data comes in, we want the CDC. I mean, as a physician, you know, when new studies are done on the way to treat a patient, I change my clinical practice. That's actually normal, and that's what we want CDC to do. But CDC should do a better job of explaining it. And by the way, CDC should make its data more apparent and transparent. They shouldn't say we have data, but we can't share it. That, I think, breeds some amount of confusion in people. I think the CDC should also tie these guidance to clear metrics so that people understand that when infection numbers go down, the masking guidance will change. That's what we want. We want to be flexible, we want to be data-driven, and we want the CDC to help guide us in that process.
And we want people to stay as safe as they possibly can. That is Dr. Ashish Jha, Dean of Brown University School of Public Health. Always good to have you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, newly released documents highlight the pressure former President Trump put on the U.S. Justice Department as he was trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. A congressional committee released notes made by Richard Donoghue, a senior justice official, during a December phone call. He quoted Mr. Trump as saying, "Just say the election was corrupt. Leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." At that point, the department had already said it found no evidence of widespread election fraud. On a second front, the U.S. Justice Department directed the Treasury Department today to hand over Mr. Trump's tax returns to Congress. At issue is whether he complied with tax law. The Treasury had refused to hand over the returns during the Trump administration. Democratic leaders in Congress sought today to extend a nationwide ban on evictions. The U.S. Supreme Court has indicated only Congress may keep the ban from expiring tomorrow night. In the meantime, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi appealed to the CDC to take emergency action.
We would like the CDC to expand the moratorium. That's where it can be done. And then, and of course, with the public message of governors, mayors, et cetera, give the money for its purpose to the renters.
Congress approved $47 billion months ago to aid renters and landlords. But lawmakers say states have been slow to disperse the money, and only $3 billion has gone out so far. The Biden administration sued the state of Texas today for trying to bar the transportation of unsanctioned migrants. Republican Governor Greg Abbott has targeted private groups that drive migrants to shelters or other destinations. He says he's taking a pandemic control measure. The U.S. Justice Department says the state is illegally interfering with immigration policy. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte reversed himself today and restored a major military pact with the U.S. It means that the two nations will continue holding joint combat exercises in a counter to China's growing power. The decision followed a visit by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Officials gave no reason for the policy switch. Japan has expanded a state of emergency to more of the country as COVID-19 infections surge. That move today came amid the ongoing Summer Olympics in Tokyo. The head of the government's COVID task force warned the situation is dire.
Following today's decision on the state of emergency, I think we are facing the most serious crisis. How the Japanese people and the entire society tackle it is the key to the future.
In the Olympic competition, the U.S. women's soccer team faced elimination today. In the end, they beat the Netherlands on penalty kicks to move to the semifinals. In bicycle motocross racing, American Connor Field, the defending gold medalist, suffered a violent crash and missed the finals. He is hospitalized in stable condition. Back in this country, new heat waves are roasting the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast. Going into the weekend, more than 60 million Americans are under heat advisories. Temperatures are expected to top 100 degrees in parts of Idaho and Washington state. In U.S. economic news, a key inflation index jumped in June by the most since 1991. The indicator used by the Federal Reserve was up 3.5% from a year earlier. Meanwhile, Wall Street was mostly lower today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 149 points to close at 34,935. The Nasdaq fell 105 points. The S&P 500 shed nearly 24. And two passings of note. Former Michigan Senator Carl Levin died Thursday of lung cancer. Over 36 years, the veteran Democrat became an influential voice on military issues. He voted against sending troops to Iraq in 2002. And years later, he argued the invasion failed to stop terrorism.
What has changed now is that there is a global terrorist network now, which is much more threatening to us than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And so the possibility that weapons would be transferred to a terrorist group now with a global reach is a very different and more threatening situation to us than it was before.
Carl Levin was 87 years old. And Richard Dick Lamb, a longtime Democratic governor of Colorado, passed away overnight. He served 3 terms, pushed through an early abortion rights law, and fought against his state's hosting the 1976 Winter Olympics, warning of economic and environmental damage. Dick Lamb was 85 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, the Chinese government closes the border of Hong Kong in the latest crackdown. David Brooks and E.J. Dionne consider the politics of the pandemic. A Pulitzer Prize winner explores McDonald's role in Black American life, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Today, more than 200 Afghan citizens eligible for so-called special immigrant visas arrived in Virginia. They are the first group of former interpreters and their families who work with the Americans to get out. They are being evacuated by the Biden administration just weeks before the U.S. withdrawal is complete and as violence across Afghanistan increases. Nick Schifrin joins us now. So hello, Nick. I know you've been following this story for quite a while. Tell us, who are these people, individuals from Afghanistan, and where are they going to go?
221 special immigrant visa applicants, and that includes 70 children, arrived via this bus at Fort Lee in Virginia. They'll be staying at facilities, including hotels on the base, prepared by the military as they complete their visa applications, which is expected to last about a week. And these are people at the very end of a 14-step, years-long process, and they are a fraction of the 5,000 special immigrant visas issued by U.S. Embassy Kabul this year and the tens of thousands of Afghan family members who are in this SIV pipeline. And advocates say this evacuation is a matter of life and death. Remember that these people worked with the U.S. military. They worked on the front lines, risking their lives for the U.S. Over the last 20 years, they have been targeted, threatened, and even killed in some cases by the Taliban. And some national security experts also say that if the U.S. doesn't evacuate them, prospective U.S. partners in future wars won't trust that the U.S. can protect them either.
And Nick, we know there are many, many more like them still in Afghanistan. What happens to them?
So Congress and the White House have been working together to try and lift some red tape that some of these applicants face. And just yesterday, Congress passed, and just tonight, President Biden signed a bill that lifts some of that red tape. There'll be more flights in the coming weeks of these applicants, and some of the applicants who are less far along the process will go to a third country, possibly Qatar or Kuwait, on their way to the U.S. But refugee advocates say the administration has simply not acted fast enough. There are no U.S. troops outside of Kabul in Afghanistan now who can defend some of these translators as they get to Kabul, as the Taliban has taken over half of Afghanistan's provinces and cut off many of those roads between Kabul and the provinces. And this goes beyond just the people, just the Afghans who were helping the U.S., including those interpreters. Take a listen to Adam Bates with the International Refugee Assistance Project.
This is something the administration should have been planning all along about how to protect these people and make sure that nobody who is in imminent danger is left behind. There are thousands and thousands of other Afghans who are in danger either because of U.S. affiliations. Maybe they worked with U.S. media organizations or NGOs. Maybe they worked on cooperative agreements instead of contracts. And then people who weren't affiliated with the U.S., but who are still in danger from the Taliban. Women's rights activists, human rights lawyers, civil servants.
And senior administration officials say they are trying to help those other groups who aren't eligible for these SIVs, including by labeling them Priority 2 or P2. That's a refugee status that would allow them to easier seek and obtain that refugee status. But, Judy, that process takes a lot of time. The U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan in a matter of weeks, and security across the country is deteriorating.
So, Nick, I want to switch now to another topic, another story you've been following, and that is these debilitating medical ailments. They become known as the Havana syndrome. Here we are 6 months in since this was first discovered. What steps is the Biden administration taking on this?
So these are serious ailments reported by hundreds of people across government over the last 5 years. For the first ones were in Havana. And the Biden administration says this is one of their top priorities. And so they've created new standards of care that allows or ensures that people who report symptoms get proper treatment. They've created new processes for intelligence sharing across the agency so everyone can see details of possible cases. And they've lowered the reporting threshold to encourage possible victims to report their symptoms. But understanding the source, Judy, remains a real challenge. Last administration, CIA analyzed what device could exist that could possibly recreate some of these symptoms, and they had real challenges on the size of a device and a device needing line of sight to these hypothetical targets. They also had a review or a scrub of all intelligence, current and former, of any foreign entity talking about or deploying any of this kind of technology, and it came up empty. So this administration says those efforts have been reinvigorated, not only the reporting, the treating, but the technical hunt for the cause of this, and CIA has approached that hunt like it did the hunt for Osama bin Laden.
Wow. So are they any closer to figuring out the cause?
In a word, no. They don't know who, what, or if anyone set out to target U.S. officials. There was a panel of medical experts last year that concluded that it could have been microwave radiation, and that panel of experts pointed out that the Russians have researched using microwave radiation in the past. But senior administration officials still say they do not know if this is a foreign actor's actions or perhaps some kind of inadvertent side effect of overly aggressive surveillance or something else. And partially, it's a range of apparent victims. Intelligence agents who work on Russia say they've had these symptoms. Diplomats working in Europe, even a White House official late last year. And after that incident, there was a deputies meeting in the National Security Council, and they decided they simply did not have enough evidence to know what was really going on. And that conclusion remains today. Take a quick listen to Secretary of State Tony Blinken last month.
We do not know who, if anyone, is actually responsible, state actor, individuals. This is exactly what we're trying to get to the bottom of.
Blinken's who, if anyone, angered a lot of people in Congress and victims. Look, there are still doubts about the cause, but this administration says they're focusing more resources to help the apparent victims and try and find the cause.
So interesting, after all these years, they still don't know.
They still don't know.
Nick Schifrin, we thank you.
Thank you.
A pro-democracy protester in Hong Kong was sentenced today to 9 years in prison, the first prosecution under the Beijing-imposed national security law, enacted just over a year ago. That law, part of China's crackdown in Hong Kong, has sparked a growing public exodus. This Sunday, a new amendment to Hong Kong's immigration law takes effect that the government says only targets illegal refugees. But as special correspondent Richard Kimber reports, critics say the legislation's wording is deliberately vague and could give it the power to ban residents from leaving the city.
Before COVID-19, this was one of the world's busiest airports. Now, it's mostly a ghost town. But a handful of late-night check-in counters in Hong Kong are still operating at full throttle, and many of the people lined up aren't sure if they'll ever come back. This family is leaving for the US.
There are many things we can't say now. It's very dangerous. We all know it. I want my kids to grow up in a place that has freedom of speech, and where they can say whatever they want and pursue their dreams.
These friends are saying goodbye before one of them moves to Scotland.
What has happened in Hong Kong in recent years worries me. I'm concerned about my safety. It feels like we are being restrained. We've lost a lot of freedoms and the chance to speak out.
Congress is debating a bill to give special visas and refugee status to Hong Kongers fleeing political persecution. The United Kingdom, Canada and Australia offer extended work and residency permits to Hong Kongers and eventual pathways to full citizenship. The programs are proving popular. 34,000 Hong Kongers emigrated to the UK in the first 3 months of the year. Britain expects 300,000 to make the move by 2026. Hong Kong used to be a British colony. It was handed back to China in 1997. That process has sparked a dramatic series of political developments in Hong Kong in the past 2 years. Months of anti-government street protests in 2019 led to China's introduction of a controversial national security law in the city in June of 2020. Beijing says it has brought stability to Hong Kong, but the legislation has faced international criticism for cracking down on public freedoms and stifling political dissent. The latest worry for Hong Kongers is the potential end to their freedom of movement. Beginning August 1st, a newly updated immigration bill comes into force. Critics warn it could give authorities the power to ban residents from entering or leaving the city. Andrew Lowe runs an immigration consultancy in Hong Kong. He says initial news of the bill sparked panic.
Oh, our phone rang up crazy. Everyone pushing our staff, can you get me the visa on or before the end of July? I'm very worried that we cannot leave Hong Kong.
His company has been operating for more than 30 years and seen waves of migration before, especially around the time of Hong Kong's 1997 handover from Britain to China. But he says this time the mood of his clients has changed.
Today is different from the old day. They decide to go and not coming back. They are so determined. You see, even I have a client, he has 3 properties in Hong Kong. He sold all 3 properties. In the old day, people will keep at least 1, just in case they want to return.
The government dismisses the concerns. It says the new immigration bill will only target people it calls fake refugees who try to enter the city illegally or who claim they can't be deported after arriving.
The amendment of the bill is by no means going to restrict any freedom of traveling of Hong Kong people. So people need not worry about that. People raise that sort of doubt. I think there might be an idea of scaremongering behind.
Legal experts say the reason for the controversy is that, just like the national security law, the terms of the legislation are too vague.
Broadly worded provisions don't inspire confidence or certainty, and those things that's what you want when you want to have the rule of law. So I think there's a lack of trust with government, and there's a lack of scrutiny because the people who have been the ones scrutinizing the government in the Legislative Council, many of them are no longer there, some of them in exile.
China has introduced sweeping political reforms in Hong Kong that give it more control over the city's legislature. It says that'll make decision-making more efficient and that there'll still be room for a variety of political views. But the changes are deepening concerns among the public and in corporate boardrooms.
Here in Hong Kong's central business district, there are global investment banks on almost every street corner, and many don't just use Hong Kong as their gateway to China, but as their Asian regional headquarters.
That could be set to change. The US says that since the introduction of Hong Kong's national security law, businesses operating there face new dangers, including electronic surveillance without warrants and the enforced surrender of corporate data. The American Chamber of Commerce says it's committed to staying in Hong Kong, but it's calling on the authorities to be more transparent about their legislative plans to give American companies more confidence to stay put.
The government says that its economic data shows that investor confidence in Hong Kong has been boosted, not shaken by the national security law, and that even if there is an exodus of talent from the city, it can easily be replaced from overseas or from across the border in mainland China.
The economy is bouncing back strongly from the effects of COVID-19, but that confidence isn't filtering through to all the city's potential future business leaders. This woman is an intern at a fast-growing tech startup in the city. We'll call her Candice. She wanted to remain anonymous for this report. A lifelong Hong Konger, she'll soon graduate from the city's top-ranked university. But she says she and many of her friends are planning their future elsewhere.
The political situation in Hong Kong in recent years is not stable. I'm not sure about the bottom line, what I can do and what I cannot do. I feel insecure since we're uncertain about our future and our career path. We're not sure what our life will be. That's why I want to emigrate and to try living abroad.
Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam says those who decide to leave will eventually come to realize how good life in the city really is. But for many Hong Kongers, the uncertainty of life overseas is a risk they're increasingly willing to take. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Richard Kimber in Hong Kong.
It has been another jam-packed week here in Washington, with infrastructure appearing to be on the path to passing the Senate. The January 6th Select Committee kicking off their hearings with emotional testimony from police who defended the Capitol that day, and a new challenge facing President Biden as hospitalizations increase due to the Delta variant. Joining us to examine the political implications of a lot of this are Brooks and Dionne. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and E.J. Dionne of The Washington Post. Jonathan Capehart is away. Very good to see you. E.J. Dionne, good to have you back with us.
Good to be here. Thanks.
So the topic's, though, pretty sober, David. Here we are. A lot of us thought we were on the way to a good place with this COVID-19, and we find out this variant is very tricky. Even people who are vaccinated can spread it, and a lot of breakthrough infections. Democrats, the president, practically begging people to get vaccinated, wear masks. Republicans are divided. You've got some of them saying get vaccinated, others not. How do you read what's going on, and where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, we were all looking forward to a smooth glide path, a fall of, you know, me and my bar scene, my clubs, and going to my Cardi B concerts and all the stuff I normally do.
Where you hang out all the time.
Where I hang out all the time, but that's probably not going to happen. And so we've just got to deal with that. And the question is, will social fragmentation happen alongside that? Will the pressure of going back down into a more alarmed position tear us apart even further? And I think what's interesting to me is how geographically different it will be. In some places where vaccination rates are up in the 70 and 80%, you're going to feel very different than when you're in Mississippi. And in my view, we need to, as Marx would say, heighten the contradictions. That where we have to make sure that people understand where people are vaccinated, life is a lot better. And I think we've learned even over the last couple of weeks, even this week, where there have been an uptick in vaccinations, that if you make it mandatory for some workplaces, and if you make the incentive structure very clear, you have to get vaccinated, that a lot of the vaccine hesitant people will get vaccinated. And so it may be cruel to say, but I think we just have to make the incentives overwhelming to get vaccinated for the sake of the common good.
And EJ, it's not all about politics. We know some people just have a innate fear of getting a vaccination, apparently. But there is a political component to this, in that a lot of influential conservatives are saying, don't do this. It's not the threat that they say it is. Is this a moment when things are going to get worse because of that?
You know, in an odd way, I'm a bit hopeful because the message is getting through, sadly, because of the deaths and the sickness. And people are starting to become very clear that if you are not vaccinated, you are in trouble. But it is profoundly political. The 20 states that have the highest vaccination rate, all those states voted for Joe Biden. You couldn't be more political. The Biden counties are way more vaccinated than the Trump counties are. And what gives me heart is the Republican Party has been divided into three. There's one part of the party that right from the start was saying vaccination, you got to do it. Mitch McConnell, who had polio, is very sensitive to the vaccination issue. Governors like Asa Hutchinson and Mike DeWine have been there from the beginning. Then you had the other group, the anti-group, where if liberals are for masks and vaccination, then masks and vaccination got to be bad things. And that's the profound dysfunction of our politics. Where I take a little hope is there's a middle group that was afraid of the second group, really didn't want to speak out. And they've started to say, you know, Steve Scalise, finally, the Republican leader in the House, a Republican leader in the House finally gets vaccinated. They're starting to say, you know, this is bad for our states and it's bad for our people. It's red counties and red states that are in the most trouble. And I'm sure a lot of business people who support Republicans are saying, this is not good. You've got to get off this anti-vax stuff. So they've created space for companies and the National Football League, for example, to get much tougher and say, you know, you got to get vaccinated with some compulsion. I don't think compulsion would have worked 2 months ago. I think it can work now because people realize we got to get out of this.
And by telling federal employees, David, the hope is that private businesses will tell employees as well.
Right, and you know, I know a lot of people who didn't, young people who didn't want to get vaccinated because they figured the odds of them getting really sick were small, and they didn't know the vaccine was rushed, and this was their logic. And then when a school tells them, if you want to go to school, you got to get vaccinated, they say okay.
Yeah.
And so the practical demand overwhelms the natural hesitancy that especially some young people feel. And so I'm with EJ. I think in general, there's been a drift toward making this a little less of a culture war issue, at least for 80% of the country.
I do want to turn to something that I think we all had to be looking at this week, EJ, and that is the hearings, the January 6th Select Committee hearings, where we had a very powerful testimony from 4 U.S. Capitol police officers who physically battled the rioters that day, and spoke very movingly about what it meant to them and why they were there to testify. And yet, again, you have Republicans who don't want to be part of that committee. There's still the anger over Speaker Pelosi about taking Republicans off the committee. Is that effort going to lead to something productive? What do you see right now?
Yeah, I think that hearing all by itself made the case for this investigation. Because I think those officers not only moved the country, just it was a moving moment. And, you know, Michael Fanone, one of the officers, saying that he felt like he went to hell and back. And he really had a pointed jab at the Republicans saying, you know, they're trying to say it wasn't hell, you know, and it was. And he was attacking the denials of January 6th. And, you know, Officer Dunn, who talked about having a word yelled at him that we never say on this show, and the overt racism of some of the people in that crowd. I think people learned things from this. And so I think a couple of things came out of it. One is the best hearings in Congress are not when people on the committee give long speeches. It's when they allow witnesses to tell the story and provide information. And I think these 4 officers, you know, gave a lesson to Congress going forward. The other is, I think Nancy Pelosi made the right call in keeping off the committee people who were going to basically try to wreck the conversation. There were 2 Republicans there, Congressman Kitzinger and Congresswoman Cheney. They were great. They were clear. And I think this is going to be productive.
You still, though, do have, David, the Republican majority in the House, Kevin McCarthy and everyone around him, saying this is a travesty and starting to blame Speaker Pelosi herself for what happened on January 6th.
Yeah, which is 90% BS. But, you know, a couple things. The hearing showed that this was not just a bunch of tourists visiting the Capitol. This was a violent assault. And the violence of the assault was made clear by those testimonies, and that's powerful. I had a conversation with a military expert who said it looks like to him when you have a bunch of people coming into different entrances all at once, there must have been some coordination. And so I'd love to know what was their coordination and where was that coordination. That's important. But then on the Republican side, if I can get a little autobiographical, I came to Washington in 1985, the same year as a guy named Dinesh D'Souza, who was a conservative guy from Dartmouth, and I was from Chicago. And we used to go to brunch, and we were part of the same community of like conservative pundits and politicians. I saw a segment of Dinesh D'Souza on YouTube today, which was him showing bits of the testimony, really emotional testimony, and Dinesh D'Souza is laughing at them for being wimps and cowards. And so it was repulsive. And to think that, you know, I spent my career as part of like a community, and half of the community went off into the Never Trump world, which I did, and then the other half went completely bonkers, in my view. And so Dinesh D'Souza is part of that community, and Tucker and Carlson, all the people we grew up with. And so that's in my little world, but that's the Republican world, that people went off in radically different directions from where they were in the Reagan years, and that's part of our national life. And I wonder where the elected officials, where they're going to end up, because eventually you have to decide whether you're going to be with Dinesh D'Souza or you're going to be with reality. And so to me, this hearing was a little piece of that decision of where is the American right going to evolve.
And if I could just say quickly, I think one of the depressing things, particularly about Republicans in the House, is that the vast majority are either there on the Dinesh D'Souza side or afraid not to be there. Right. And that doesn't bode well for the Republican Party in the long run. And I think politically it's not going to be good either, because the 2022 elections are going to be decided by turnout, yes, of the base, but in significant part by moderate people in the suburbs, many of whom swung to Biden. This Republican Party that doesn't want to take on the violence at the Capitol, those suburban voters are not going to warm to that in 2022.
But you do still have the former president out there, David, saying this committee is completely wrong-headed, nothing happened. The divide could not be more deeper.
Right,
than it is.
You know, I'd put the odds of him getting the Republican nomination are pretty good in 2024. Yeah. But as EJ was talking about with the masks, there are Republicans who are in the middle who are shifting away. And we'll talk about infrastructure, Republicans being reasonable. And so you're beginning to see within the party a sense that we just want to have normal politics again. And we don't want to be governed by this guy. But that's a recipe for political end of your career right now. And so they're feeling their way toward reasonableness.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because we do have what looks to be a deal on infrastructure, where you've got at least 10 Republicans who look like they're going to go with the Democrats on this bipartisan infrastructure plan. And the question is, what does this mean? I mean, in everything else, the divisions, couldn't be starker, but on this, they are working together.
Yeah, well, as many as 17 voted for this thing. So,
yeah.
There are two worlds. You read, frankly, a lot of the media their charge is to show the Republican Party are all completely awful and the Democratic Party are all completely socialist, and this is sort of the revenue model. You go to interview people like Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio, who's the leading Republican. He's still a normal, sane human being. Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, like these people are just normal human beings who want to do a good job. And so the reality, in my view, is not as polarized as sometimes the media portrayals, and that was evidence this week. And it's evidence that Joe Biden's theory that compromise can work seems right now in this week.
Only 40 seconds left to sum it all up.
I worry this is a one-off, and I do think it shows that for a long period, they couldn't even pass a transportation bill because of the really strong anti-government sentiment in the Republican Party. During the pandemic, we learned you needed pretty strong government to keep the economy from going off the rails. I think there is a philosophical and ideological shift reflected in this deal, and it reminds me of the good old Whigs and internal improvements. I'm bowing to David's inner Whig here, where it's a much better term than infrastructure. Internal improvements are in the Republican Party's DNA, and they're finally coming back to it, at least for this one moment.
I'm taking away the image of the inner Whig in David Brooks.
Using that.
David Brooks, E.J. Dionne, very good to have you. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Fast food is a staple of American culture, but in recent decades, there's been a new focus on health and wage inequality. Jeffrey Brown talks to author Marcia Chatelain about the complicated history of McDonald's in the Black community, how the fast food giant supported Black franchise owners, but was a trap for unhealthy diets and low wages. It's part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
After high school, we'd go take the bus to downtown Chicago, and we'd go to McDonald's that had
In that sense, Marcia Chatelain is like so many of us, eating a zillion and counting burgers and all kinds of fast food at McDonald's and other chains. But she's also an historian and Georgetown University professor who realized that the history of fast food is one way to explore important issues of race in America.
Everyone around the world can identify McDonald's, but what McDonald's means in Black communities is distinct and special because it's a reflection of the various places where African Americans have been historically excluded. Everyone eats McDonald's, but what McDonald's means to everyone, I think race really plays a difference in how that's interpreted.
It's the focus of her book, Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America, winner of this year's Pulitzer Prize in History. Chatelain, the daughter of Haitian immigrants, is just the second Black woman to earn that honor.
And when you say fast food, McDonald's is
the place.
McDonald's is the leader. McDonald's set the standard and expectation of what fast food could be. How did McDonald's go from a place that really thought of itself as a suburban brand to
largely white
to something that's so present in urban communities that are mostly African American and people of color? And there's actually a story there.
A story that began amid segregation, when McDonald's and other fast food chains complied with local laws that excluded blacks from their restaurants. The Civil Rights Movement and subsequent Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended discrimination on the grounds of race. And several years later, the first black-owned McDonald's franchise was opened by Herman Petty in Chicago.
From the vantage point of 1967, when African Americans have only had the right to be in public accommodations for 3 years, opening a McDonald's in a black neighborhood is a big deal.
McDonald's soon discovered a franchising goldmine.
McDonald's seized upon the moment, and what they reasoned was if they put African American franchise owners in African American communities, they could not only respond to the call for black ownership, but they could create a new consumer base by making these investments, and they were right.
Advertisements in the 1970s and 80s centered on family and community. The 1990s brought a focus on celebrities, sports, even cartoons.
Who do you think you are? Let me show you.
And commercials continue today for a contemporary market.
Say, I am strong. I am strong.
From the start, fast food was more than just food.
McDonald's was a presence in black communities as people were organizing voting drives or thinking about ways to support the NAACP. So in many ways, McDonald's became part of the social fabric of black life, even as they continued to promote products that were for everyone.
But as Chatelain sees it, this empowerment came with a price. As more restaurants opened in black and Latino communities, fast food became a common staple of diets, and consumers were often left with few healthy choices.
The focus with fast food on high rates of obesity, heart disease, diabetes in the black community, how much did that become tied to the emphasis of fast food?
The thing that I find most fascinating when we talk about health and race and fast food is that we have to take a holistic look at the quality of a person's life. And if we don't understand that fast food is sometimes the most rational and smartest choice in someone's life because they don't have the time or the energy for cooking, they're concerned about where their children are, and they're concerned about where their next meal is coming, then we're not doing the full work of food justice without thinking of all of the factors that constrain people's choices.
I'm part of the management team now, Mama. Oh, baby, I'm so proud of you.
McDonald's promoted itself as a source for jobs, but they were largely low-wage jobs. That goes to Chatelain's larger critique of a strategy based on so-called black capitalism, emphasizing private ownership and wealth over social and governmental programs.
And that becomes the tension between the idea of black capitalism and actual economic justice.
Exactly. Black capitalism has long been a strategy to fill the gaps that are created when a racist society refuses to deliver to a group of people. And so throughout the 19th and 20th century, African Americans have turned to black capitalism to fill those critical gaps. The fundamental problem is that business can never tend to people the way that communities can.
Chatelain sees the same thing happening again now. After protests against systemic racism in 2020, companies pledged support for black businesses and suppliers. She says great, but not enough.
The conclusion was more black business, support black creators. These things are incongruent, and I think that it is because we return to this idea of business because the other work is just really hard to do. Black business didn't create these problems. Black business can't solve these problems.
How do you see your role as a historian? I'm struck listening to you about every time you
my campaign speeches.
Well, a little bit. I mean, just in the sense of tying the history to a sense of social justice.
I tell my students this often. History is your greatest tool in problem solving. That anytime you find yourself stuck on how you're going to respond to a challenge, take a moment and look at the history. And so I think my role as a historian in 2021 is to sound the alarms, as well as to remind people that the past is a source of great inspiration.
And the historian isn't done. Chatelain is now at work on a series of books capturing new perspectives and voices in the civil rights movement. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Washington, D.C.
Jane Willenbring is a geologist who solves problems related to the Earth's surface. In 2020, she was featured in a NOVA documentary called Picture a Scientist, found on PBS Passport. She and 2 other women shared their experiences in the sciences, ranging from brutal harassment to years of subtle slights. Tonight, Willenbring gives her brief but spectacular take on making science more diverse, equitable, and open to all.
I'm a geologist and I study how landscapes change. When I was starting to do my master's degree, one of the things that I was so excited that I was going to get to do is to actually go to Antarctica. And then when we finally got there, the thing that was most challenging to me was the behavior of my graduate advisor. Every day there would be some comment about who I had had sex with. He would call me a slut and a whore. It was just very difficult to keep my spirits up during that period. And so I remember it was, just very difficult to navigate that situation. He told me that if I said anything about it, that I would never have a job in science. That was really hard. I was pretty vulnerable at the time because I really needed to get this degree and I needed to get a letter from him so that I could go on to get my PhD. And so I just kind of had to suck it up. And that's basically what I did for over a decade. I did not realize how many women who are doing field science experience this kind of behavior. Over half of them experience sexual harassment doing field work. One day, my little girl said, "I want to be a scientist just like you." And she was 3 years old, and that little comment from my little girl just triggered me. That night, I decided to file a Title IX complaint against my former advisor. Other women came forward as a result. He filed an appeal. Then the president of the university actually stepped in and said, "Nope, we are firing him. He is no longer going to be working at this university." He had a glacier named after him in Antarctica, and they actually decided to rename the glacier. I actually don't know what he's doing now. When you talk to people about how to improve academia or STEM for women, you hear a lot about like, oh, we have to get more women interested in science and math. I feel like we should take a step back and stop asking how we can, get more women interested and sort of protect the women and people of color and people with disabilities and LGBTQ persons who are in science already. Have done a lot of work since submitting the harassment complaint to try to make it so that my daughter has a better science life than I did. My name is Jane Willenbring, and this is my brief but spectacular take on calling out harassment in the sciences.
Jane Willenbring, thank you for your courage, for sharing it with all of us. And you can watch all of our brief but spectacular episodes at pbs.org/newshour/brief. On the NewsHour online right now, our Friday 5 Stories video shares news items that you may have missed, like a deadly red tide in Florida and pandemic-related passport delays. You can watch on our YouTube channel or on our website. Again, pbs.org/newshour. And stay with PBS. Our Yamiche Alcindor picks up on the push for vaxxing and masking. Plus, her panel also explores the powerful testimony from the January 6th hearing. That's tonight on Washington Week. And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here on Monday evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you. Please stay safe and have a good weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson, BNSF Railway, financial services firm Raymond James, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org.
Supporting social entrepreneurs and their solutions to the world's most pressing problems. SkollFoundation.org.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.